All right. What's going on, everyone joining us live? Welcome back to another installment of Consulting Growth Insights. I'm excited for this conversation personally. I've got Mark Zweig here with me, and I need to put my mute on over here. I'm hearing myself talk twice. Um, Mark and I met a little while ago over LinkedIn, and Mark's a super successful entrepreneur. Started out, I believe, Mark, in the professional services space. Correct me if I'm wrong. A very successful AEC consulting firm, this wide group. One of the top in the industry, I believe. So, um, and you've got some very um, interesting views on how professional services firms should operate, should market, should do business development. I think at a high level, we agree on most things. We're going to find out if we disagree on some things today, but um, I am looking forward to the conversation. So I'll kind of kick us off a little bit. Well, Mark, welcome to the show. First of all, thank you for taking the
Hey,
time.
thanks, Mike. Good to be here with you, man.
Um, I'll kick us off really quickly. So I'll tell maybe a bit of a story, and I've got some of this coming out in my one of my upcoming newsletters here. But a very common kind of refrain that I will hear from many, you know, consulting firm founders and partners is something along the lines of, well, you know, nobody really does it like we do it. And then they'll go to things like, our clients really tell us that we're the best kept secret in the industry. And they kind of wear it like a badge of honor. And they talk about, and then they'll go to something along the lines of, well, so we don't really have any direct competitors. Like that's the general theme I hear. I'm not going to say most of the time, but fairly often. And like probably, I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if it's maybe as high as 70% of the time one of those three quotes or variations of them comes up in a conversation as I'm meeting these people. Um, and the reason I bring it up is because to frame up the problem that we're going to talk about, um, and you really made it easy for me this time, Mark. I usually have to go a little bit back and forth with folks to figure out a topic and a direction, but you sent me a quote, which I'll read in a second. Um, that was enough. Um, but if we think about where things are right now in the professional services space, and we think about things like offshoring, globalization, and Gen AI, and the rise of fractional everything, and the rise of smaller boutique firms, et cetera, et cetera. You put all those things together, and just the exponential increase in choice within any industry from a professional services perspective is crazy. And more choice equals more risk, right? And if
Yep.
anybody's read, I think the book was called Paradox of Choice. I forget the author, is written like back in like 2003 or so, and kind of the core. That was pretty much their core thesis: is the more choice there is,
hmm
the lower the conversion rate, and the fewer people actually buy.
Makes
There's more
sense.
indecision, if you will, but the
Yeah.
indecision is all about risk. So anyway, I belabor the point. I'm going to read a quote that you sent me because I asked you, like, what is something that, like, a view that you hold dear that's maybe counter to what most people think in the industry from a marketing and business development perspective. And you wrote, um, relationships aren't everything. Sure, they help, but I don't want to base my professional services marketing on that because relationships are portable. The best and most successful firms create a brand that makes the company the low risk choice by any client, not the person who works for the company, but the company itself. That takes a sustainable marketing effort and corresponding budget that is relentless and not dependent on how the firm is performing financially. Long quote, lots to unpack there, but I want to unpack all of that in this conversation because I think there's a lot of good stuff there. So
hmm
let's start with let's talk about relationships.
Okay.
So I talk quite a bit about relationships. I think that's when you and I first spoke a while ago. That's kind of the direction the conversation went, if I remember right. Um, and I've even developed a framework for to help firms build relationships at scale. but I look at relationships, I think, a little bit differently than traditional traditionally sort of thought about. Um, and I generally agree with your statement, even though I focus a lot on relationships. So when you say relationships aren't everything, expound on that a little bit. Let's start there.
Okay, well, I mean, the typical professional services firm is privately held, and its owners slash partners slash principals, they're the lead sellers and producers of whatever it is that the company does. And those people are typically the ones who are responsible for business development. And they rely on their personal networks, either, established prior to starting the business or during the course of owning that business to sustain it. So that's sort of the model. I mean, I think the belief of a lot of those people is, um, you know, uh, if you want to sell work, you've got to go out and make these relationships. And I think a lot of them believe that that maybe they're better at it than other people in their business, and so in some cases they kind of hog those relationships and make it difficult for other people to ever establish them, and that sort of sows the seeds of their own destruction, in the process. But they're going to be the heroes of the day as long as they're there, as long as they're alive, as long as they're motivated and they keep bringing the work in. That's great. But the problem is, if you want to create a company that's enduring, that outlives those people, and that can grow and scale and be valuable with or without those particular people being involved, that to me has always been one of the core tenets of entrepreneurship is you build a business that has value you can extract upon exit. You don't build a business entirely around your personality, which means when you're gone it has no value, you know so I think it sort of starts right there, and those people, in my experience, they don't have a lot of belief that there's a real science to marketing. They don't really understand brand building and how that can completely alter the future of their firm and their sort of even day-to-day existence. And so, they don't fund it, they don't spend money on it. It's overhead. Overhead should be minimized. And we tried that once and it didn't work. These, you were talking about some quotes people give you. Those are my favorite ones. Well, we tried that once and it didn't work. Whatever the marketing tactic you're talking about is, it's not just calling on people. Or, we believe word of mouth is the best marketing. That's my favorite one. That says we do nothing to me. Okay. And just, hope that somehow the word gets around that we're competent or whatever. But yeah, it was kind of funny how you opened that up, talking about the people, that you run into and how many of them have particular views or whatever. I was at this Y Group annual conference here about a month ago in Tampa, and there was some guy, and he had quite a few drinks, and he just, he kind of horned in on our conversation, and he had a firm. It was a small firm, and he just wanted to tell us how great he was and how great his firm was, and they got 20 people. He doesn't want to be any bigger than 20 people. That's all he wants to be. And, they get all the work they want to get, yada, yada, yada. And anyway, it just got a little bit tiresome because I know other people who built businesses in this industry that I come out of, which is architecture, engineering, environmental consulting, that type of professional service, and who've just done unbelievably well and built incredible companies that they were able to sell and make huge amounts of money on. And they don't have to sit there and brag that they got this great 20-person firm that relies on word of mouth.
Yeah, well,
So,
and I think the big misconception I find it's great that you brought up word of mouth because the big misconception is that word of mouth means that you can do nothing.
mhm,
The funny thing is why does word of mouth happen? Well, sure, it happens because you do good
exactly.
work, right? But that's
Yeah,
that's table stakes. Like you're literally in the professional services business. The work is your product. So if you can't deliver good work, then you don't have a company.
exactly.
So yeah, you need that, but the way word really gets around at scale is through marketing and building partnerships and business development and all those things. It
Right.
doesn't like, and I think people mistake it, or either they mistake it, they don't know it, they don't understand it. But there's, I think a lot of it is they just they don't think that it'll happen because I don't think they understand the mechanics. But there's a level of scale that you reach at which point your traditional one-to-one sales-led, networking-led approach no longer is enough to beat
Yep.
natural churn. No matter how good you are and how long you can keep your clients, churn is natural. It's something like people just phase out.
Yeah.
And
No,
especially
you're
if you have a
right.
project-based firm, right? Like some
Right.
architecture or something like that, things of that nature.
Yeah. I agree 100%. So yeah, what gets you the word of mouth, I think is the question. I mean, you've got to be able to people have to be able to experience your service in some way. How are they going to be able to do that in the first place? Then that takes us back to a wide variety of marketing tactics that in my mind are not necessarily relationship centric. Not to say again that the relationship isn't critical. Sure, if you have a good relationship and something goes wrong, they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're not going to just throw you out right away. They'll try to work with you. Maybe they're easier to negotiate a decent fee with. I mean, maybe they're just easier to work with all the way through whatever you're doing. So yeah, relationships great. But what can we do? And the way I always looked at it is, what can I do that makes the phone ring? Because I hate making sales calls. I don't know about you. I can sell, believe me, but I don't want to. I don't want to be calling anybody hat in hand looking for work. And so I'm basically going to figure out a way to avoid that in my business or
Yep.
businesses. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a really great brand and drive demand beyond my ability to supply it. So I never make a call. All I do is sit there and harvest leads. People call me, people send me emails, uh, people approach me, and that's the way I'm going to do it. Okay, that then helps me build a business that can live without me, which is the goal because I want to be able to exit at some point. Back on the whole entrepreneurship thing. I mean, people would say, "Well, I'm an entrepreneur. I've got this small business. I've had it for all my life, or whatever." That's not to me an entrepreneur. That's a small business owner. I get bored with stuff. I get tired of it. I like to do a lot of different things. Is that the way to make the most amount of money? No. Doing one thing and being really good at it, in my experience, is the way to be the most successful financially. But at some point, who cares about that? What's really important to me is like how I spend my time and who I spend it with and what I'm doing, and I get bored. So I want to be able to exit businesses. I see nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
I don't see that as a flaw or some kind of a failure. I see it as the opposite of that. And those businesses, I want to see those businesses go on and be enduring. Zweig Group's 36 plus years old now. I'm kind of proud of that. I sold it once, I bought it back, after it was destroyed by the private equity firm we sold it to. Made it successful again and sold it again back to the employees, though, this time, a small group of partners. But anyway, I'm going to do all those other things that are going to make the phone ring and the calls come in,
Yep.
or make it such that if do land in front of a client, they're going to say, "Oh, I've heard of you guys before. I know
Yes.
you work in my business.
Yep.
You understand my world. I don't have to school you in the whole
Yep.
thing like I do everybody else." That's the goal.
So something I want to posit to you here is I think,
Mhm.
and again, I believe we have the same or very similar view on what the relationship is and what it can do and where for the firm. Um, I think one of the places, like one thing I want to, at least from my perspective, I want people not to take away is like, oh, well, all the branding needs to be just about the firm.
Yeah.
That's a place where they go wrong. Is
Right.
the reality is people don't build relationships directly with your brand. They build direct relationships with your ideas, your unique POV frameworks, etc. Right? They learn about that, your
Sure.
people, but then you
Yes.
got to connect those things to your firm so you can build
Yes.
affinity to the firm. And what I
That's a
see
good point.
is, yeah, I see people making firms making the mistake of they either go, well, I don't want this to be about me, so
Mhm.
I'm just not going to be present. I will not be the face of the firm, which that doesn't make any sense. And none of my partners are going to be the face of the firm. We're just going to do the boring old same thing that every single consulting firm does. We're going to do boring white papers and webinars and
Projects,
yeah,
yeah.
whatever, all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
And no one's going to know who the people are unless they know the people. Now we're back to relationships all of a sudden. And then you ask them, well, where do your business come? Where does your business come from? Well, it comes from relationships. But we do all this marketing stuff too, though, and we think it's working. Or they go the other side
Mhm.
and they really focus in on and they empower their people to build these brands, the personal brands, but they don't do a good job of connecting it to the corporate brand. And that's where I think where you bring up like, hey, relationships are portable. On the one hand, that's a
Yes.
positive thing, right?
Right.
Because your
You
direct
can hire
contact
people.
leaves and goes to a new firm. Awesome. They have that relationship. They're most
Yeah.
likely going to at least try to bring you in.
Yeah. Or you
But
can hire people that have, relationships and
right.
business and
But if your
following.
people leave, now you
Yeah.
got a problem because if that's where the
Right.
relationship lies, well, that's crap.
Yep.
So how do you connect the personal brands of say the founder and maybe the core partner group to the brand of the firm that makes that, which is the topic of our conversation, the low risk choice? We'll talk about risk in a second, but how
Yeah.
did you mentioned you built Y Group, very successful, sold it to private equity, they ruined it, you bought it back, made it successful again.
Right.
What did you do? Like, how do you? Because
Oh,
I've
God.
seen your content, I've seen the content the firm puts out. You've done it, you've made it work. I don't
I
want to put words in your mouth. What have you done? Like, well, how did you make that successful?
Well, I mean, just to get into the whole rebuilding process is it's a lot more than marketing. I mean,
Sure.
truthfully, we had such a good brand that even after 5 years of horrible performance for clients and product quality erosion, the brand was still good enough that the leads continued to come in and we had something to work with. Okay. So that part of it, in a way, was kind of easy, but it's because we did our homework in the first 16 and a half years we were in business.
So maybe let's talk
Um,
about that then, because
yeah.
that's a if that doesn't support the point we're making, which is like, hey, I sold it. They literally tried, not tried, but tried to ruin it figuratively,
Yes.
and they couldn't because of the strength of the brand that we built.
That's
So,
the truth. We
what did
lost
you do in the
everybody.
first place?
Yeah, we lost every. We were just basically starting over with nobody that was there and bad products. I mean, just think about that. But so if you go back, though, what did we do to create that? Well, I think it was nowadays they call it content marketing or whatever. I guess we called it that back in 1988 too. But it just was a relentless, continuous generation of content. And to me, it either has to be thought provoking or funny, or it's not going to do very much for you. That's always been sort of my approach. I want it to either be really thought provoking or funny. So I try to be contrarian, but it's not hard because it seems like, the world is made up of so many lemmings out there that just jump off the cliff together and do the same stupid stuff. And we're so the industry has so many buzzwords and acronyms that it's really easy to sort of poke fun at that, and distinguish yourself. So of course I did that myself, and then you try, as you said, as you bring in key people, you promote those people, you give them, their own little corner of the business to build. You make them owners in the company, by financing their stock purchase and not making them cough up the cash. Um, and you make sure everybody has got somebody that backs them up. So it's not just them. You absolutely insist on having a real viable transition plan in place for every person in the company. And then you just keep generating content. I mean, we did a lot of speaking. We had a seminar business. So we got paid to do that, made money, and it supported a lot of direct mail at the time. That helped build our brand, just continuously building that database, making it larger and larger, and sending out more and more mail on a scale that everybody else thought was ridiculous. You know, I'd be at a marketing seminar and have 100 people out there who all paid $1,000 to be there or whatever. We're making $100,000 gross income on one day. And somebody would say to me, I'd be talking about direct mail, and they'd go, "Well, it's like I get all your mail, and I tell you what, I just throw it right in the trash can." You know, it'd be some snickering. And I go, "Yeah, Bob, but guess what? You're here. Okay." And so are all these other people. So it worked. Okay. You can throw it away. I don't care what you do, but enough people don't throw it away and they sign up. Okay. So, turning your marketing into something that actually makes money by providing useful information to the audience that you serve. That was a big part of it. The average firm's like, well, we want to go to all the professional societies and join all them. That's great too, but that costs money. I used to have this policy. I wouldn't give a talk to anybody unless I got paid for it. And sometimes they'd be like, "What? AIA or AC?" Be like, "Yeah, you want me to do a talk? I got to get paid. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it." "Yeah, but think of all the business you're going to get from this." I go, "I get business without that. Okay, I don't need that." You
But
know.
that's the important part though, right? Is you which you said early on,
Mhm.
which is building up enough demand where
Well,
you don't need the you're saying no more than you're saying yes.
I was taught early on by a guy who really knew how to sell. Even if I needed it, I was gonna act like I didn't need it, okay? I'm telling you, I was 22 years old, I went to work for a consulting company that served the industry that I worked in my entire career. This guy came out of Xerox Corporation. He was one of the developers of their national sales training program. He understood selling, okay? And his whole thesis was based on we don't need you. If we might work with you if you're really going to be fun, easy, do things the way we want to do it. We might work with you. That actually is, the pull away is what it was called, and it's kind of like relationships with mates. If it's too easy, it's not desirable. But
If you seem
anyway,
too desperate, you're most likely not making it to the second date.
right. I don't want to get sidetracked there, but I mean, there's sort of a lot that goes into that mentality. But so, a relentless direct mail, back on that, free information. We had a newsletter. We started out with my Rolodex of 250 people. By the time I was done with it, after my non compete wore out on newsletters 3 years later, it had 2,300 people I sent it out to. And it provided entertaining, useful information, being as contrarian as I could be. And then we turned that into a paid vehicle. We sent out a subscription, pay 195. We got 500 of those signed up. We got about 100 grand, just boom, came in. And then, everybody was doing monthly newsletters that were boring. So we decided ours started as every other week. Then we made it every week because the more frequency, the better off we were. We were in their face all the time. I mean, just think about that. It's like consumer product companies understand this. I used to try to get architecture and engineering firms to understand it. It's all about frequency. Brief and frequent is far better than extensive and infrequent. But they're all wired to the opposite. We want to do this one thing. We want to have a really good brochure that's 32 pages with onion skin that nobody's ever going to freaking look at. Okay. Bullshit. I mean, I'm serious. It's so. just ramping up and then just relentless direct mail. But what if they, don't want our mail and they call us to get it? Fine. That is for everyone that does that, 10 other people buy something from us. And then pump more and more products and services into the stream, more people into the stream. Let them use that distribution channel you've created to build their own followings. And if your business planning process says every year we need three new things out of each profit center to sell, and we need three new ways we're going to market it, well, you end up with 10 profit centers. You got 30 new things and 30 new ways to market. It's baked into your culture, and you must have a growth plan. We don't want to see any retreating or any minor, muddling along goals. They're going to have to be ones to grow. It really works. I mean, I don't know what else I can say. It just works.
Well, I love a couple of things um, that you talked about, which is one is the kind of the last one you mentioned, creating new products. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of firms, I would say most firms in this case, I don't use most very often because a lot of people that
Mhm.
use most never actually looked at the data. They don't understand what the word most means from a
Everyone.
statistics
Don't you
perspective.
like everyone? Certain people say everyone all the
Yeah.
time now.
Yeah. I learned my lesson the hard way, let's put it that way, a while ago. I'm like, well, I didn't really mean that, but that makes sense. Yeah. There's new anyway, but in this case, I feel pretty comfortable saying most.
Yeah.
Most firms don't don't do enough service and product innovation
Mhm.
because they think that they sort of look at their service as the core consulting service. And sure, you can create new business units, you can create new service offerings within those. That's great. But what I love about what you're talking about is, well, and again, I'm not advising every single firm to go and create a paid subscription
Yep.
necessarily.
Yep.
It's a tactic,
Yeah.
and maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't. But
Sure.
what I like about what you mentioned is, well, we had, you know, uh, we had a great subscription base, and we decided to turn it into a subscription because that does two things. One, that adds more value to your free product.
Right.
'Cause, oh my
And
god, people are
and
subscribing to this. They pay whatever $200 a year. That's crazy. I wonder what's in there.
well, that those newsletters got up to where we had, a seven-figure business. We were charging 475 a year. It's free now. It's completely free, because we're in a different time.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to pay for newsletters anymore. There's just too much free content out there.
I mean,
But
I don't know that I think to do it as a professional services firm would probably be hard, but I mean,
yeah.
there are tons of paid newsletter. Hell, I subscribe to a couple
Okay,
myself.
well, I shouldn't say no one. I guess if you have unique information that
Yeah.
you're tracking, some kind of data, that's a different matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Um,
Yep.
but
But what,
anyway, eh,
talk a little bit about, um, well, I want to make sure we get to a couple other things. So maybe we'll pause on that. One of the other things you mentioned in the quote you sent me, and you kind of mentioned it
mhm,
as we were talking, is this uh, relentless marketing and the investment that goes into it.
yeah,
So, um, you when we think about sustained marketing investment, I've talked about it quite a bit that sustained growth requires kind of three things, and you can even argue that it's only two, but the three things I talk about are growth investment, operations investment, and service innovation, which we just kind of touched on service innovation a second ago. And you can argue that service innovation fits and kind of straddles both of those.
sure.
So, there's when you mention consistent investment independent of the firm's financial performance, I
Yeah,
could totally just envision CFOs and like financially and operationally minded people going, WTF is this guy talking about? What do you mean independent of the performance of
yeah,
the business?
right.
Um, Talk about that a little bit.
To me, I mean, the marketing is like I call it an off balance sheet investment. I got to keep feeding that machine. The preoccupation today with knowing that every dollar we spend leads to a certain dollar of revenue, to me is really misguided. Um, you don't know where all your how they're all working, but all I judge it by is the firm growing and is it profitable? Okay. And so if it is, I'm going to keep throwing gas on the fire. I'm not going to go, well, we could go from a 12% profit to a 15 if we cut 3% out of our marketing spending. I'm not going to think like that. I'm going to be happy with my 12 if I'm getting a 30% revenue growth rate on top of it. And I know my value is going off the chart because I've got this unbelievable growth trajectory. Okay. I'm going to go for that, um, versus optimizing my short term profitability by cutting marketing expenses. So, my experience is if you want to do better than everybody else in your industry and grow faster than them, and your value is related to your growth. Sorry, folks, it's not all about your multiples of historic EBIT, like all your number crunchers want to tell you. That's bullshit. Okay. I can tell you story after story of companies that sell for beyond any reasonable multiple of EBIT because they have a high revenue growth rate. But if you want that, you've got to outspend everybody else that does what you do. And you won't always know how it benefits you, but you look for ways to spend the money because you have a faith, this inner guiding belief in something that you don't know is true, that it's going to work. Okay.
Yeah.
And my
Well,
experience is it does.
and something to point out too, which kind of gets us back to the first thing we're talking about. It's if you have that high growth rate,
Mhm.
if I'm a private equity investor or I'm a larger firm that's looking to acquire or whatever, I want to understand that that growth rate is sustainable after I purchase the firm,
Exactly.
right? And if all of that is based on the founder's network and the founder's personal brand and nothing else,
Hurts the
it
value.
doesn't take a genius to figure out that after that 2-year earn out period, you better have something else figured out. You're pretty much rebuilding that engine from scratch, or you're somehow tying it to the existing engine that you already have in the larger firm, if that's what it is.
So
Um,
true. So true. I guess sort of tying some of this together to me is, you know, I think firms are self conscious or hesitant to really jack up the frequency of whatever it is they do, whether it's, social media posts or it's e marketing or it's, ads that they purchase online, whatever. There's a lot of hesitancy, like, well, we don't want to overdo it. People will get turned off. And my experience is not that's not the case. I mean, you go back to one thing we did do when we got the company back, and I had to fight both the guy I hired who was in charge of marketing at the time, and one of my future partners a year or two after that on this, and the lender that owned the company before we bought it back, was ramping up e-marketing. So they weren't sending out enough emails. They'd send out one, here, there, whatever. I'm like, I'm sending out 3 emails a day. They're like, you're going to burn out our list. I said, if I don't do that, I'm going to be out of business in 2 weeks. Okay. So I'm going to send 3 emails a day out. And sure, there are going to be people who opt out or whatever, but I'm also going to sell a whole lot of shit. All right. And that was absolutely pivotal to us. And I think a lot of companies are really hesitant to do that. They think somehow that's not professional. That's not the image that they have. You know, I used to have people like try to compare marketing and architecture and engineering firms to being like an ambulance chasing attorney advertising on the back of the yellow pages or whatever. No, we're not. We're not doing that. We're classy. We're doing good stuff. We're giving out good information, you know? So,
so talk about those emails maybe a little bit. There's something else
yeah.
I want to dive into after, but Like, what kind of content are you putting out there? Because I mean, there is, in theory, a danger of,
Yeah.
burning out the list. Sure, that's not a
Well,
it's it's not an incorrect question to at least ask, but I think people look at it the wrong way. But I think it all depends on what
yeah.
you're actually sending.
Well, I think everybody needs to understand you got to make deposits before you can make withdrawals, you
Yep.
know? So to me, it's interesting content. I mean, data is really great. So if you've got unique data, that's great. Um, if you've got how to information, if you've got case studies, if you've got stories that you tell that are entertaining, that make a point of how somebody did something right or did something wrong. I mean, it's unlimited, you know? I never really had a problem coming up with something to provide people that would hopefully be useful to them. And then you make the sale. Then you go for the kill. It's information, 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 and then sell them something. It's a pretty good formula. Um, you know, uh, we're just talking about this today. I was working on a little marketing plan for Janus Motorcycles, our parts and accessories, clothing area. And I said, let's show people how to use this stuff. Let's, every every email we send out, here's the proper way to, wear your helmet. This is good helmet fit. This is, this is why you should have what kind of armor you need in your jeans or whatever. And just always have some education with it. So it sort of softens them up and give them some useful information where you're not really trying to sell them anything specifically. And then you make the sale.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're right. The consumer goods companies have definitely figured this out a long time ago. I
Mhm.
think in the B2B space, you see software companies for the most part have figured that out. But you look at professional services, mostly they have not. And I think one of the big reasons I see is people
Yeah.
actually misunderstand the concept of frequency and how it works, especially in the digital world.
Yep.
Although most of it, I think, transfers over to the physical world too. Like people think, well, just because we sent it or just because they saw it, if they see another one and another one, another one, they're going to get, burnt out.
Right.
The problem is most people don't see it. Even if they do
Exactly.
see it, they just completely scroll by or they do literally, yes, they received it in their mailbox
Mhm.
and it was in the whole pile of other direct mail stuff and they did actually toss it in the trash. So they didn't actually see it.
Right.
So
This is right. It take
like
because we're also overwhelmed with stuff that it's hard to break through. There's no doubt about it.
and I think there's also
But
the question about the content coming from the category as a whole that makes
yes.
a difference, which is,
Yes.
I mean, I am freaking tired of getting all these political
Oh, it's
ads coming through my mailbox because that
mind-boggling.
literally is too much. But that's because literally every
Yeah.
single freaking candidate sends them twice a day, every day, I should say, and I literally
Yeah.
am throwing away a pound of paper every time. You're
Yeah.
not. That's not happening in the for an
Mm,
architecture firm or a consulting firm. Like
it's not.
I don't get any emails for the most part. Like marketing agencies do it.
Yeah.
Um, some consulting firms do it, but they maybe have a weekly newsletter.
Exactly.
So the volume isn't actually that high if you really think about it compared to the volume that
And
exists as a whole. And that's just
you
emails. Same thing with
that's right.
ads, same thing everywhere.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, there are other avenues we can use. I mean, that's why the branding to me becomes so consistent, so important. I used to make fun of some of the companies I worked with. I'll never forget I had one. It was a very large firm in Florida asked me to take a look at their marketing and then come give a talk to their board. And what I found, so I went to all their offices. I requested stationery, business cards, everything that had their name on it, like plans with title blocks, pictures of the signs outside every building. It was mind boggling. I put it all on a giant board for them to see. They had so many different names they went under. Some of them were initials, some had an and in them, some didn't, some had the full name. They had all these different colors. Nothing was consistent. And so, if you want a breakthrough, if you want that familiarity when somebody actually needs what you've got, you got to really have some super, super, super high consistency in your colors, how you use your name, how you put it out there, and put it on everything: decals, laptops, coffee cups, freaking shirts, name tags, everything. Cars, your vehicles. It used to drive me crazy. Company's got 30 cars. Every person there buys whatever they want. What's that about? We should all be driving something memorable. I was in the construction business. All my trucks were black. Everybody else had white ones. The only guy that had black ones was me. Okay. People say, I see your trucks everywhere. You know, I mean, there's a lot to all that. It's, we both know it's 25 things, it's 50 things that you have to do. There's no sort of one magic bullet, like send out 3 emails a day and you're going to be unbelievably successful. No, you know, but one thing we didn't really touch on is this whole idea of having unique information. There's a lot of value in that. We're constantly polling clients and getting information from them that we spit back at them. That's valuable. People want to see that and they really respond to it. It gets their attention, especially if you're asking stuff that's thought provoking. We used to do these surveys and we still sell a boatload of research data. It's a really big 7-figure plus business for the company's wide group. But we would ask questions like of owners of firms: do you feel one or more of your fellow partners is just coasting to retirement? There's my press release, baby. I don't know what percentage are going to
So you would
say
just do like
yeah.
single question polls kind of thing?
Well, that would be in the middle of a
Okay.
survey, but you can do single question polls
Yeah.
too. I love those. Today with Survey Monkey, it's great, or you can throw it out
Mhm.
on LinkedIn and see what happens. So having that data and then figuring out questions that are going to give you something that's going to get people's attention. Like I'd like to ask one right now. I don't know what you're hearing out there. You must have heard of EOS. It's highly
Yep.
promoted. Okay.
Yep.
Everybody, well, we're doing EOS. We've got an EOS implementer. We pay this guy 6 grand a day or whatever. I'd like to I'd like to do a survey on EOS and go, how many of you think EOS is just a bunch of bullshit that's really not going to work? Okay. And, and now I've got a 29% of small business owners polled said they think EOS is crap. I'm going to get attention with that.
I think you might have just gotten some attention right now. I'm about to start getting messages from my EOS implementer friends.
I got a lot of them too, buddy. And I'm not,
I know, I'm kidding.
I'm not going to say that. Look, I'm not even trying to say EOS is bad. I'm just saying, I think it would be interesting.
It's a cult. I'm
It's a
with you.
cult.
I think it's a cult.
It's a cult, exactly. And when they start using the words and everybody's talking about their rocks or whatever, it's like, okay, you
But
know,
it's genius marketing if you think about it.
yeah,
Like
oh, it is.
if we're talking about, and this is the last part I want us to talk about. Like technically, if you really think about it, EOS is a professional services firm. Now they
Yeah, it is.
license the product, etc. Right? So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
but the question here really is de-risking, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so let's talk about that briefly. You talk about that um, when you said when you're building when you're building a brand, you want to build one that makes the company a low risk choice.
right.
What do you mean by that?
It's the familiarity. The more familiar you are with it, the lower risk choice it is. Just look at consumer product companies. Let's say I don't do a lot of grocery shopping because I don't. And I go to the store and I'm in the frozen corn department and I see, Joe's corn and corn brand corn. And then I see Bird's Eye over there. I don't know that Bird's Eye corn is any better, but I have heard of Bird's Eye. They make a lot of vegetables and stuff, frozen vegetables. I'm probably going to buy the bird's eye. I used to carry two bottles of 64-ounce bottles of soda in my marketing seminars. One was Coke and one was Roach Brothers Cola, which is a chain of grocery
Yep.
stores in New England. And so, I would say, okay, which one of these is better? You look at them, they look the same, the bottles look the same. The Roach Cola probably came out of the same bottling plant after they were done with the Coke. They ran the Roach Brothers through there. Roach Brothers is 69 cents, Coke is $1.69. Your bride sends you to the store to buy some soda. What are you going to pick up? Are you going to buy the Roach Cola or are you going to buy the Coca Cola? Well, I'm going to buy the Coke because I could come home with the Roach Cola and they'd be like, what did you? I didn't want this stuff. I wanted real Coke. What's wrong with you? You know? And Coca Cola outspends everybody else. Their marketing budget's huge. I saw somewhere advertising market was like 18 or 19% of revenue. They sell more than anybody else and they sell it at a higher price. So just apply that thinking to the professional services business and anything you can do. I remember once there was a company that got some really bad press. I was on the board of a professional services organization with this guy who was the CFO, and they were just raked over the coals. They were in the news. They had a big lawsuit against them. They lost it. It was all related to how they paid their employees. Huge black eye by any standard. So 10 years later, I asked this guy, I said, Dan, tell me the truth. In retrospect, was that lawsuit good or bad for your business? He goes, it's really funny. We were just talking about that the other day in our board meeting. And the conclusion we came to was it was good. We went from a small regional company to a national footprint because everybody knew who we were after that.
That's fascinating. I mean, does speaks volumes and a whole slew of things happen in society, if you will, but
Yeah,
we don't have
it
time
really
for
does.
to talk about that.
Yeah.
Um, you know, something interesting that you mentioned familiarity, and I think I talk about it in terms of affinity, but there's not a lot of emphasis put on that because when we talk about risk, right? Well, what's a way that you can de-risk the buying decision? Well, I think we have to think about risk in two ways. There's organizational risk, which is risk to the company, meaning can you get us to the objectives that we have as an organization? But then there's personal risk, which is if I choose you, am I going to get fired if you fail? Most of the buying decision is made based on personal risk.
Yes,
So
you're
people
right.
automatically think, oh, well, that's a relationship thing. But it's not. You can't build a relationship with every single person in the buying committee. So
It,
how do
it,
you de-risk that when they get into a room together and they're
yeah,
talking about it? Well, you want to go, oh yeah, I've heard of Zwei Group, or I've heard of Proof Point
right.
Marketing, or I've heard of whatever it is.
Can't blame me for hiring them. These guys do a lot of what, yeah, that is so true. There used to be an expression in the architecture world nobody ever got fired for hiring HOK. HOK did more corporate headquarters than anybody else. Okay. And that was an actual expression that was used. And it's a reflection of exactly what you're saying. The bigger the organization, the more that de risking of the service provider, the more important that becomes.
Yeah.
And you're right on with that.
What I'm curious, I was curious about is how did a company like HOK get to that point? Because what people make the mistake of usually is they go, well, they don't do that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but they're HOK. They don't need to do this anymore.
I mean, how they got there, I mean, I'm not sure I can say, although I've been an
Yeah.
observer of them for over 40 something years. Um, but they focused on their markets that they wanted to serve. They didn't say we do everything for everybody. They did serve multiple market sectors, but they were very focused and had a business and marketing plan around each one of those: corrections, higher education, corporate, sports facilities. Those were the things that they really focused on. and had all kinds of unique marketing efforts tied to that sector, such that the people, the potential buyers would immediately recognize them and think, well, that's all they do. You know what I mean? But I was sitting with the chairman of HOK once at the retirement party for their CFO, who was a guy I knew, and he dated my or one of my older sister's friends when they were in high school. Anyway, I'm sitting next to this guy, and we start talking about it. He goes, if you look at HOK, he goes, it's very interesting. This is the chairman of HOK. Because you look at all our business units and what makes the most money here, and it's sports facilities. Now, they had 70% of major league sports facilities at one
Wow.
point. And he goes, it also has the highest overhead of any unit and the highest marketing expenses, and it's the most profitable. Okay. Once again, I mean, even
Well,
within their
there you
own
go. I mean, investment in growth, investment in operations consistently.
focus on a market sector, getting really good at it. Can't sell to the whole world. If you want your marketing to be effective and to become known, you've got to kind of narrow that down. You know, can't
Yep.
afford to do it for the whole world.
Yeah, I think the positioning is and positioning and differentiating in the right way to de-risk that buying decision is really what it's about. Right? It's positioning your firm in a way that makes it seem familiar and less risky when
Yes.
the way even like when you have that like the story I'll often tell is this was years ago. I'm pre- pretty fresh, if you will, and I'm having a great sales process. I'm talking to this firm, and I've met their entire executive team. They're about a $20 million firm. There's the CRO, the CFO, the CEO. One of the other partners is in the room. Everybody seems to love me. Everything is going great, seemingly. Contracts are being sent. They're being reviewed, supposedly redlined. Hey, sorry, we decided to go in a different direction. What the? Never had that happen before. What the hell happened? I thought I had a great relationship. Well, the CEO wasn't completely bought in, and the CFO, even though that was my contact, which is surprising. That doesn't happen very often. They're not going to fight for that.
Mhm. No, that's why you always got to aim at the top and let them kick you down.
Well, there's that, but also
But
there, it was just based on the relationship. I got brought in, and I had
yeah,
my champion, but there
right.
was no other familiarity.
Yes, I
There
get
just
it. I mean,
wasn't.
it makes total sense. So yeah,
And I think
there's
that's the part that's just so often missed is how do we
mhm.
it's how do you influence that conversation that's happening in that room behind closed doors when you aren't there?
Well, you said it. I mean, like, we say, well, nobody hires a company, they only hire the person. I can say that's not true. Like here, we
Mhm.
had a water treatment plant operations contract. Yeah, this goes way back. Okay, let's say 20 years ago. Well, they hired CH2M Hill. Okay, why CH2M Hill? Everybody knew they were big. They did a lot of this. There were other firms here locally, but who could blame me as a municipal employee for wanting to hire the biggest brand name that does this nationally? It had nothing to do with the individual, I can assure you. They had no operation here. There was nothing. There was no relationship here at all. CH2M Hill got it.
Yep. Yeah, I
So,
think I mean, look, I've hired consultants for my business that I had a relationship with,
mhm,
but I've also hired consultants I had zero relationship with, but I knew who they were because I read their books, I read their
yeah,
been attended their webinars, I got their
sure.
newsletters, whatever. And
Yep.
when I had the need, I reach out like, "Hey, I think I need your help. I don't know you. I like as far as a relationship goes." And to be fair, in both instances, some of the people I had relationships with were the wrong choice, and some of the people I didn't have relationships were the wrong choice. Right. But I agree with you that it's not the relationship is becoming, I think, more and more of I don't want to say it's a nice to have, but it doesn't really play into it until you're much further down.
Yep.
And then it becomes it can be a very valuable differentiator. If you have the relationship and somebody else
Absolutely.
doesn't and everything else is equal, then yeah, the
Yeah.
firm with the relationship probably wins as long
Absolutely.
as all the other pieces are in place.
Yep.
All right, so we're well past our scheduled time here. Let me ask you one last question. So when you think about de-risking, what would you say is the most successful thing tactically that's why Group did to build that familiarity, to de-risk that situation where whether it was you that ended up being on the phone with a client or whoever?
Mm. I'd say it was either having the research data or the newsletter at the high frequency with the quality content. One of those two things or both. That just I still write my newsletter article every week, and people
Mhm.
are like, "I can't believe how you must be in my boardroom. It's like you're in my brain." When they tell you that, you're
That's my
doing
favorite
it
piece of
right.
feedback, both either my LinkedIn
Yeah,
content or my newsletter. It's like, are you listening to my conversations? I'm like,
yeah,
sort of.
yeah, exactly. Because you're not that different, and other people like you are having this
Right.
problem, right? Even though you think you're totally unique, but yeah, it probably was those things, I think. And again, the newsletter gives a chance for other people to shine.
Mhm.
I share the content constantly that other people wrote in there, and
Yep.
I just sent one out today. It was an article somebody wrote a year ago to somebody I'm working with to try to help them.
Yep. Definitely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. I didn't even ask for questions, but um, we have a few people still on. If anybody maybe, well, no, I'm not going to do that. We're already way past time. If you have a
My dogs
question,
are my
what's that?
dogs are going to start barking any minute. My plumber's
Yeah,
going to be here to work on my
there
gas
you go. There you go.
fireplace.
Well, thank you for your time. This was fun. Hope all of you people that joined live enjoyed it. If you're listening after the fact, hope you take something valuable away as well. And I will be back next week with another interesting guest, and we're going to chat about partnerships. So stay tuned for that. Thank you again, Mark.
Thanks, thanks, Mike. Been great being with you, man.
All right. Let's see. Looks like we're all almost uploaded.